The Teutoburg Forest looms, dark and sprawling, its roots older than the roads that cut through it, and the villages that tremble in its shadow. To some, it's just a stretch of trees, a remnant of the ancient wilderness that once blanketed the land. But to others, it's something much more sinister. Its stories linger like a sickness, whispered between generations, shadows that move without light, voices calling from unseen places, and a hunger that waits for the unwary to step too close. Why do the trees twist as though frozen in agony, their bark etched with faces contorted in silent screams? Why do those who venture too far into the forest rarely come back? And those who do return, they're not the same. Their eyes flicker with something haunted, their voices hollow as they mumble about paths that shift, whispers that seem to know their name. You've heard about the battle. The Romans marched into the Teutoburg Forest, confident and strong, led by a trusted ally. Thousands of them. Not one walked out. The names of General Varus and Arminius still ripple through time, their fates twisted by betrayal and blood. But what really happened that day? What turned the Teutoburg Forest into something more than a battlefield, a wound in the land that never heals? It's not just the past that haunts the forest. It's alive now, breathing, waiting. Why does the mist roll in so suddenly, silent and black, swallowing sound and light? Why do the shadows stretch farther than they should, reaching out like they have minds of their own? And why do dreamers miles away wake drenched in sweat, whispering of trees closing in, of voices screaming, of something waiting in the dark? The forest doesn't just hold its secrets. It guards them, twists them, wraps them in its roots. What does it want? What does it hunger for? You're standing at the edge now, the path winding into the trees. The air is colder here, heavier. The forest watches, silent but alive, daring you to step forward. Chapter 1: The Betrayal of the Shadows. The Teutoburg Forest was a place of whispers long before it became a graveyard. Its gnarled oaks clawed at the sky, and its shadows writhed as if alive. In 9 CE, Roman soldiers marched into this foreboding expanse, seeing only another nameless obstacle to conquer. To the Germanic tribes, however, the forest was sacred, alive with spirits and ancient wrath. At the head of the Roman legions was Publius Quinctilius Varus, a governor confident in Rome's strength. At his side was Arminius, a Germanic chieftain raised in Rome, fluent in its language and trusted by its leaders. Arminius had earned Varus's faith, presenting himself as an ally who could unite the unruly tribes under Roman rule. But Arminius had other plans. It was Arminius who convinced Varus to march into the forest, claiming a rebel uprising needed suppression. Eager to demonstrate Roman might, Varus agreed, unaware he was walking into a trap. The dense forest soon swallowed the legions. The open skies vanished under a canopy of twisted branches casting the ground in twilight. Footsteps became muffled, the air damp and heavy. Soldiers joked uneasily about the silence, but their voices faltered as if the forest was listening. Arminius seemed at ease, riding confidently at the head of the column. His wolfish grin was hidden beneath his helmet, his sharp eyes scanning the trees with a predator's familiarity. Then, without warning, he was gone. He and his Germanic auxiliaries vanished into the shadows, leaving the Romans exposed. Hours turned to days, and unease crept through the ranks like a slow poison. When the attack came, it was as if the forest itself had turned on them. Spears rained from the shadows without warning. Soldiers fell, their cries swallowed by the trees. From the darkness came the guttural war cries of Germanic warriors, fierce and unrelenting. The Romans tried to form ranks, but the forest refused to yield. Roots and branches tore at their formations, turning their discipline into chaos. For 3 days, the onslaught continued. The forest became a living nightmare, its every shadow hiding death. The Romans fought desperately, but their supplies were lost. Their men deserted, and the wounded were abandoned. By the end, the legions were no more. Banners lay torn, eagles captured, and bodies rotted where they fell. Varus, broken and shamed, took his own life, rather than face the emperor's wrath. When the tribes finally withdrew, their vengeance was complete, but the forest was forever changed. Blood soaked its roots, binding it to the memory of slaughter. The wind carried the cries of the dying and the whispers of betrayal. Travelers who dared to enter spoke of an oppressive presence, as if the forest itself watched and remembered. Disembodied voices in unknown tongues echoed through the trees, and ghostly figures clad in rusted armor drifted between the trunks. The Romans called it Clades Variana, the Varian disaster, but to those who lived near its borders, it was simply Der Schreiende Wald, the screaming forest. A place where betrayal and bloodshed had left a scar so deep that even time could not erase it. Chapter 2, The Wailing Woods. The Teutoburg Forest was not content to let its past fade into history. The blood of thousands had seeped into its roots, and the cries of the dead lingered in the air. Locals whispered of its sinister nature, calling it Der Schreiende Wald, the screaming forest, a cursed place where the dead could not rest, and the living were drawn into its darkness, never to return. Travelers passing near its borders spoke of strange sounds, faint cries carried on the wind, voices murmuring in ancient tongues, and the occasional guttural roar that sent shivers down their spines. At the heart of the forest stood the screaming trees, ancient oaks whose twisted, gnarled branches stretched skyward in agony. Their bark bore grotesque shapes resembling faces frozen in silent torment. These were no tricks of light. The faces were unmistakably human, as though the trees had absorbed the suffering of those who died there. Some claimed they heard faint whispers when standing too close, soft and mournful at first, but growing louder, more anguished with every moment. Those who dared touch the trees often fell ill, plagued by fevered dreams in which shadowy figures screamed and reached for them from the darkness. The legend of the screaming trees turned grim when a desperate woodcutter, ignoring the warnings of the villagers, ventured into the forest to harvest firewood. The moment his axe struck one of the ancient oaks, a piercing wail erupted, echoing through the forest. The woodcutter abandoned his tools and fled, but he was found days later, wandering the outskirts of the village, muttering incoherent phrases in a language no one could recognize. He died shortly after, his body contorted in a grimace of unspeakable terror. The villagers buried him near the forest's edge and vowed never to disturb its trees again. Those who traveled deeper into the forest reported stranger, more unsettling phenomena. There was the ever-present feeling of being watched, a suffocating awareness that tightened with every step. Shapes flitted through the shadows, too large for animals, too swift for the human eye to follow. Travelers described seeing ghostly figures dressed in rusted Roman armor, their movements slow and deliberate, their hollow eyes fixed on some unseen point. One merchant, caught near the forest at dusk, claimed he heard hoofbeats circling his camp. When he stepped outside, he saw no horses, only the imprints of hooves in the soft earth leading deeper into the trees. Those who ventured too far were often lost. Sometimes their belongings were found scattered near the forest's edge, shields leaning against trees, arrows driven into the ground in deliberate patterns, boots standing as though their owners had vanished mid-stride. Survivors who returned told stories of an invisible force that seemed to press down on them, as if the forest itself were alive and pushing them away. Some spoke of a distant drumbeat that grew louder the deeper they went, accompanied by faint cries and the clash of swords, as though the ancient battle still raged on in some spectral realm. Even those who avoided the forest entirely were not spared its influence. On certain nights, the wind carried an otherworldly wail, a low, mournful sound that seemed to come from the very roots of the trees. The villagers feared these nights, bolting their doors and staying indoors. The sound was not just noise. It carried with it an overwhelming sense of sorrow, a deep and inescapable grief that weighed on the soul. Some claimed it was the forest mourning the dead, others that it was the cries of those trapped within, begging to be freed. The villagers lived in uneasy coexistence with the forest, building crude wooden totems along its borders as a desperate attempt to ward off the spirits within. These symbols of protection seemed to do little. The whispers and shadows persisted. The unspoken rule became clear: never enter the forest after dark, and never speak of it aloud. For the forest remembered, and its roots were steeped in blood. Those who dared venture within often found themselves claimed by its shadows, leaving only their cries to join the wail of the screaming forest. Chapter 3. The Black Mist. The Teutoburg Forest held many horrors, but none were as feared as the Black Mist. It was said to be a living entity, a spectral fog that moved with purpose, devouring light and sound. Locals spoke of its arrival as a curse, an omen of death that swept through the forest, swallowing all who dared stand in its path. Unlike ordinary mist, it appeared without warning, thick, cold, and suffocating, and those caught within it often vanished, leaving behind only whispers of their terror. Travelers who encountered the Black Mist and lived to tell the tale spoke of its unnatural stillness. No breeze carried it. It simply appeared, coiling around the trees like a predator stalking its prey. The world beyond it disappeared entirely, leaving its victims blind and disoriented. Even sound seemed to be consumed, voices falling flat, footsteps muffled, and screams swallowed whole. Those trapped inside described a choking dread, as though the mist itself were alive, watching, waiting to strike. One of the most harrowing accounts came from a Roman deserter who fled the legions years after the massacre. He had sought refuge in the forest, believing its haunted reputation would deter pursuit. Days later, he stumbled into a nearby village, his face pale, his voice trembling. He claimed he had seen a mist unlike any other, black as night, and moving as though it had a mind of its own. He described shapes within it, shadowy figures clad in rusted armor, their hollow eyes glowing faintly as they moved in silence. The man vanished that same night, his belongings left untouched, his footsteps leading back toward the forest. The mist was not merely a veil, it was a gateway. Survivors often spoke of hearing distant battle cries echoing through its depths, shouts in Latin and Germanic tongues, the clash of swords, and the thundering beat of drums. Some even claimed to see flashes of the past, spectral armies locked in combat, their forms flickering like dying embers. These visions were not confined to sight alone. Witnesses described feeling the weight of fear and fury, as though the emotions of the dead seeped into their minds. Those who lingered too long in the mist often returned changed. A hunter, well known for his bravery, ventured into the forest after the mist descended, determined to prove the legends false. When he emerged hours later, his once steady hands trembled, and his eyes darted wildly at unseen threats. He spoke of whispers that had surrounded him, voices in Latin urging him forward, deeper into the mist. At the heart of it, he claimed to have seen a figure, a towering man in Roman armor, his face obscured, but his presence suffocating. The hunter never spoke again, his silence broken only by the occasional mutter of, "I was not supposed to be there." The Black Mist was not bound by time. Villagers who lived near the forest's edge reported seeing it drift beyond the trees, reaching toward their homes like an invading army. On nights when the mist spilled into the open, the air grew impossibly cold, and a thick silence fell over the land. Livestock panicked, dogs howled, and even the bravest souls bolted their doors, unwilling to face whatever lurked within. When morning came, the mist would retreat, but it left a heaviness in its wake, as though the forest itself had exhaled something vile. Not all who encountered the mist were fortunate enough to return. The stories of those who vanished were countless, but their belongings often resurfaced, arranged in strange and deliberate ways. Roman shields leaned against trees, as though waiting for soldiers who would never return. Rusted swords were driven into the ground, forming unnatural patterns. Footprints led into the mist and stopped abruptly, as if the earth had simply swallowed those who made them. The Black Mist was a harbinger, a reminder of the forest's hunger. It was as though the spirits of the dead, bound to the site of their slaughter, had found a way to reach the living. The villagers who lived near the forest had no defenses against it, save for prayer and avoidance. They left offerings at the forest's edge, coins, bread, even carved effigies of soldiers, hoping to appease whatever force controlled the mist. But the mist was not something to be bargained with. It came and went as it pleased, answering to no god or man. The mist was the forest's memory, a manifestation of its anguish. To step into it was to step into the past, to relive the terror and bloodshed of the massacre. And for those who ventured too far, there was no returning. The mist claimed them, just as it claimed the cries of the dying and the echoes of betrayal, folding them into its endless, suffocating shroud. Chapter 4. The Ghosts of Varus and Arminius. The Teutoburg Forest bore more than just memories of battle. It cradled the spirits of those who had fallen, unable to rest. Among these restless souls, two stood out. Publius Quinctilius Varus, the Roman general who had led his legions to their doom, and Arminius, the Germanic chieftain whose betrayal had sealed their fate. Their specters haunted the forest, locked in a ghostly struggle, each seeking something: redemption, revenge, or perhaps the peace they could never find in life. Varus's ghost was said to wander the deepest, darkest corners of the forest. His once proud Roman armor rusted and worn. His face, twisted in eternal despair, was often seen reflected in the still waters of the forest's murky pools, his hollow eyes searching the empty forest for something lost. His footsteps, once steady and commanding, were now faint, echoing through the trees like a distant drumbeat. Those who heard it spoke of a deep, aching sadness that filled the air, a sorrow so profound that it could drown out all other sounds. Varus had failed in life, leading his men into an ambush from which they would never return. In death, his spirit was trapped in the forest, wandering endlessly in search of redemption that would never come. The villagers who lived on the outskirts of the forest claimed to hear his voice in the wind, soft and pleading, calling out to his men, his comrades, asking for forgiveness that would never be granted. Some said they had seen him in the mist, his spectral figure drifting like smoke through the trees, his head bowed in shame. His ghost, on the other hand, was different. His figure was seen less often, but when it appeared, it was with a chilling intensity. He was no longer the proud chieftain who had betrayed the Romans. He had become something darker, something feral. Cloaked in wolfskin, his eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, as if burning with the fury of his betrayal. His presence in the forest was like a storm gathering on the horizon, intense, unpredictable, and dangerous. He was not a figure who wandered aimlessly. His movements were purposeful, and those who encountered him in the depths of the forest felt a deep unease, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Some believed Arminius's ghost was not seeking redemption, but revenge. His betrayal had brought victory to his people, yet his conscience seemed forever torn, the weight of his actions heavier than the blood he had shed. The whispers in the forest spoke of his tormented soul, of a man who had outsmarted Rome only to find himself trapped by his own choices. Arminius was often seen standing at the edge of the forest, his eyes searching the horizon, as if waiting for something or someone to return. The two ghosts were said to be locked in an eternal conflict, their spirits unable to find peace. Varus's ghost, forever mourning the loss of his men, and Arminius's, forever haunted by the weight of his betrayal. It was as if their spirits were bound together, unable to move on, unable to escape the legacy of the battle that had destroyed them both. Those who ventured too deep into the forest and encountered the two specters often spoke of hearing their voices, Varus's pleading whispers and Arminius's cold, silent rage, mixing in the wind like a twisted symphony of sorrow and anger. Locals who dared approach the heart of the forest would often feel a sudden, oppressive chill in the air, as if the very ground beneath them had turned cold. Some claimed to have seen Varus's ghost, his form flickering in and out of the mist, and others spoke of Arminius's glowing eyes, watching from the shadows. But no one was brave enough to confront them directly. The ghosts of Varus and Arminius were not merely figments of the past. They were living reminders of the forest's eternal torment, and they had a power that no one dared challenge. As time passed, the stories of the two ghosts became legends. The villagers no longer spoke of Varus and Arminius by name, fearing that to speak of them would invite their wrath. Instead, they referred to the haunting figures as the spirits of the fallen, and it was said that those who wandered too deep into the forest at night would find themselves lost, forever caught between the past and the present, unable to escape the grasp of the ghosts who had once shaped the fate of empires. The forest, it seemed, had become a prison for the spirits of those who had once lived and died there, and the ghosts of Varus and Arminius, locked in their endless struggle, were destined to haunt the trees forever, their presence a constant reminder of the price of betrayal and the cost of pride. Chapter 5, The Forest Never Forgets. The Teutoburg Forest defied the passage of time, as though the roots of its ancient trees held tight to the secrets of its past. In the centuries since the massacre, the forest's darkness only deepened, its reputation growing like the mist that so often shrouded its depths. While the legends of ghostly legions and wailing winds were well known, there was another tale, one far stranger, whispered only by the oldest villagers. They claimed the forest was not merely haunted, but alive, its very essence a remnant of the souls it had consumed. Strange phenomena continued to plague the forest. Trees would sprout in perfect rows where none had stood before, forming unnatural paths that seemed to lead nowhere. Entire sections of the forest would vanish overnight, replaced by stagnant pools that reflected no sky, only shadows. A merchant once spoke of stumbling upon a clearing filled with flowers that bled crimson when touched. He fled, abandoning his goods, and refused to speak of what else he saw. The forest's pull was strongest on the nights when the moon was hidden. Travelers lost in its depths often described feeling a force guiding them deeper, their steps compelled by whispers too faint to understand. These paths always led to the same place, an unmarked glade in the heart of the forest, where no birds sang and the air hung heavy with stillness. Those who reached this place reported seeing faint lights dancing between the trees, but they never stayed long enough to uncover their source. The glade had no landmarks, and those who fled could never find it again. One story told of a farmer who disappeared into the forest while searching for a lost cow. He returned weeks later, gaunt and silent, clutching a bundle of rotting branches in his arms. When questioned, he muttered only one phrase: "The roots remember." He died the next morning, and the branches he had carried were found arranged in a circle around his bed. The villagers buried him quickly, but his tale spread, fueling fears that the forest itself was alive, its roots spreading far beyond its visible borders. As the years passed, new terrors emerged. People began to dream of the forest, even if they had never entered it. In these dreams, they stood among endless rows of blackened trees, their branches twisting together to form walls that closed in slowly. In the distance, voices chanted in a language no one could understand. The dreams always ended the same way, with the dreamer standing before a massive tree, its bark split wide to reveal a hollow core filled with writhing shadows. Those who had these dreams often woke with dirt under their nails, as if they had clawed at the earth in their sleep. But the most chilling legend of the Teutoburg Forest was that of the Tree of the Fallen. Deep in the forest, it was said, stood a single oak far older than any other. Its roots sprawled like veins across the ground, and its bark was slick with something that looked like blood. Those who claimed to have seen it spoke of hearing voices emanating from the tree. Not whispers, but screams. They said the tree moved when no one was looking, its branches creaking like bones. One explorer, a soldier who had fought in wars far from the forest, dared to approach the tree. He returned days later, covered in scratches and unable to speak. His companions said he clawed at his own face in the nights that followed, as though trying to remove something unseen. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse and broken. "It knows my name." The soldier disappeared the next day, his tent empty, his footsteps leading into the woods. The villagers believed the tree was where the spirits of the dead gathered, their souls trapped within its massive trunk. Offerings were often left at its base, coins, weapons, even food, though no one dared approach too closely. The tree never seemed to age, its leaves a deep, unnatural green, even in the harshest winter. Some said its roots stretched across the entire forest, connecting every shadow and whisper into a single, living entity. Others claimed it was not a tree at all, but something far older, something that had been waiting long before the Romans arrived. The Teutoburg Forest was no ordinary place. It was alive, its roots intertwined with the souls of the lost. For those who entered, it offered no escape, only the promise that they too would be remembered by the forest forever. The forest lives on. The Teutoburg Forest endures, dark and unyielding, its shadows longer and deeper than before. Travelers who dare its borders speak of an unsettling pull, a silent call, drawing them into its depths. Even the most rational minds cannot shake the feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes lurking just beyond the trees. Modern hikers report compasses spinning wildly, paths shifting, and faint whispers in unknown tongues. Recording devices fail, batteries drain, and some claim to hear voices in their footage, soft, pleading, and filled with sorrow. A few never return, their belongings left eerily arranged in unnatural patterns, as though the forest itself had taken them. Villagers claim the forest grows restless, its influence spreading beyond its borders. Strange winds carry faint cries, shadows move where none should be, and the forest seems alive, its roots digging ever deeper, reaching for more. The Teutoburg Forest is no longer just a place. It is a force, feeding on the memories of the lost and the lives of the curious. It does not forget, and it does not forgive. It simply waits, patient and unrelenting, for the next soul to answer its call.